Here's a question for you. Should Warhammer 40K have an open gaming license? Can you imagine a world where other people could create content and create miniatures and create rules for Warhammer? Would that be a good thing, or would it be horrible? I'm Matthew from Mini Wargaming, and I want to talk about that today. It's something that's been on my mind as to whether or not an OGL, an open gaming license, would be a good idea for Games Workshop to implement. Now, there are a lot of pros and cons to open gaming licenses, as we can see through Wizards of the Coast, Dungeons & Dragons, but I have a feeling that it would be a net positive, and I want to tell you why. Of course, I want you to leave a comment below about why I am absolutely wrong, or maybe why you agree with me. I really want to hear your opinion, so make sure you leave a comment. So first off, what is an open gaming license? If you're not familiar with what those are, it's essentially, in a briefest way, it is a license for pretty much anybody to create official, if you want to use that word, content or miniatures or rules or campaigns or story or lore for a game or a setting. Now, there are limits, of course. So for example, with Dungeons & Dragons, their open gaming license allows you to use only a particular part of things that they already created. For example, when you look at the different classes, then you can use things like the Druid or the Rogue or the Fighter or the Barbarian. But you are not allowed to use other ones, like ones that come in other expansions or certain subclasses that come in expansions. Basically, the stuff that you see in the player's handbook is usually available in the monster manual, not all of it. When it comes to creatures, you can use things like skeletons and zombies and some of the dragons and all of that. But when it comes to things like mind flayers and more exotic stuff, those are not in the open gaming license, which means if you did create Dungeons & Dragons compatible content, you could not include mind flayers in your creation. That's not to say that other players wouldn't be allowed to use mind flayers when they play your game. That's whatever the Dungeon Master wants to do. It's just you can't include them in your creation. Now, the reason that Wizards of the Coast does this, and we can have a discussion all you like about their whole debacle with what they were trying to do with the open gaming license. Let's put that aside for a second. That's not what this video is about. The reason they do it is because they believed, at least at one point, that by allowing third-party creators to make content without having to pay royalties or license fees, that they would allow them to expand the influence of Dungeons & Dragons, and that more people would play it as a result. And in the end, even though other companies are profiting from their IP, that it would mean an overall expansion in their own revenue and profit, because more and more people would be playing, which means that when they came out with their own paid products, that people would want to buy those, or at least be more likely to buy those. And I believe this firmly to be one of the reasons that 5th edition exploded so well. I know the open gaming license has been around longer than that, but I feel like in 5th edition it really took off, and I know there's more than one reason for that. But for me as a Dungeon Master, I am a forever Dungeon Master. I've been DMing since I was a teenager. I run D&D and other role-playing games on pretty much a weekly basis at home for fun, so no, I'm not going to record it. And I can say that because of the open gaming license, it has kept me playing Dungeons & Dragons for much longer than I normally would have. I would have easily migrated to other systems much sooner if it wasn't for all the support that's out there. As an example, one of the first campaigns I ran in 5th edition was Tomb of Annihilation. Tomb of Annihilation is a great module, but it also is lacking a lot of content. They create this wonderful continent of Chult, which is a jungle continent and full of dinosaurs and undead. But it's kind of empty because, you know, there's only so much they can fit in a book that's this big. So you go on to dmsguild.com and you can buy tons of supplements that add encounters and content and locations and NPCs and all sorts of stuff, specifically to Chult. Not even like generally to jungle scenes, but there's literally supplements for Tomb of Annihilation on DM's Guild. Same thing for Curse of Strahd, same thing for a lot of these other games or a lot of these other modules. And it's made my job so much easier, so I am more likely to keep playing the game, keep buying their new books as they come out, and keep buying their miniatures and everything else, and not migrate quite as quickly over to other games. As whenever I do migrate over to other games, I find the hardest thing about playing them, even if I love the games, is the lack of third-party content to support it. Therefore, I have to do way more of the work. Now, perhaps I am totally off my rocker and thinking that is comparable somehow to miniature war games. But I don't think so. I do think that there needs to be some modifications to it, but the overall idea still is good. Obviously, this goes against the current Games Workshop system, which is a typical closed license where they have full control and only they get to create official materials for it. It doesn't stop people from making like unofficial narrative campaigns and battle reports, but it does stop people from making official codexes and rules and stuff that they can sell, or miniatures. Now, once again, it doesn't stop people from making proxy miniatures as long as they're not too close to attract the attention of their lawyers. But that's fine. We already know that you can have that big conversation about copyright and trademark and all that all day long. But in the end, you can't really stop people from making third-party terrain and miniatures that are compatible with your game. But that's not what I'm talking about here. Now, what would be some of the pros for Warhammer 40K? I've alluded to some of them when I talk about D&D, but let's talk about them more specifically for Warhammer 40K. I firmly believe that Games Workshop can only be so good at creating official content for their own game. The reason for this is because they are beholden to the shareholder, which means anything they do has to make a lot of money, which makes sense for a business. It has to make a lot of money though. Like if they come out with something and it makes, $100,000, it's like, I don't know, whatever. That was not worth the effort. Whereas when a third party, a small company or a one-man company creates something and makes $100,000, that can make a big difference in their livelihood. So the problem with this is that it means that the rich is always going to get richer, in the sense that Space Marines will always be the #1 faction to get more models. It also means that Warhammer 40K is always going to be the game to get more of the attention. Obviously, if I'm talking about an open gaming license in the general term, that they can use it in 40K or an Old World or an Age of Sigmar or maybe some of their other games as well. And they just won't care about things that a lot of players would love to have access to, but it's just not worth them doing. And you might think, well, if a lot of players aren't going to buy it, if it's not going to make a lot of money, then who cares? But the thing is, if you have this long tail of tons of smaller companies making content, you are more likely to attract or keep people who are already playing Warhammer. What both Dungeons & Dragons and Warhammer 40K are really good at are growing the market. They're good at attracting new customers, at making it an accessible game. I don't care if you like the game or not. It's hard to argue with that. Their companies are growing year after year. We can have the discussion about Wizards of the Coast lately, but really 5th edition really saw that climb, and 9th and 10th edition for 40K have seen a steady growth in the number of people who are playing the game. I think they're making the mistake in focusing a little too much on organized play, but it's hard to argue with the money that they're making. And so you get players like me who are just like, okay, I'm tired of organized play. I'd rather do something more narrative. Sure, we have access to Crusade, but it's not exactly what I want. It doesn't have exactly what I would enjoy in a game. So if other people were allowed to create official content and sell it as so, it would encourage more people to actually create that content and maintain it and balance it and be creative with it and come up with artwork for it, because there's money to be made. How many Kickstarters have come out over the past few years for 5th edition D&D that have made hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars? That means real resources can be put into these things, even though that amount of money is, well, it's kind of small for a company like Games Workshop. It doesn't really attract their attention that much. And I realize, of course, $1 million is $1 million even for Games Workshop, but it's hard to chase those small amounts. What this would do is it just keeps the entire hobby vibrant. I think by not having an open gaming license, we're doing this anyways, but what it's resulting in is more games being created. Now, that's great. That's awesome. I myself am making games, and I love doing so, and I would do so anyways. But I have to say that I'd be more likely to want to spend my time making supplements for 40K, knowing that there's already a built-in audience, than I would to create my own games. So even if I did create my own games, more of my time would more likely be spent on 40K, because I do this as a business, which means I need to focus on things that make me money. Well, guess what? Warhammer 40K is the most popular miniature war game in the world by far, so it makes sense. This is the reason why on our main channel, you see that we cover 40K more than any other game over the past 17 and a half years. Even though we do cover other games as well, they don't get as many views, Therefore, we need to focus on the things that get views. Therefore, the things that get views get more views, and the rich get richer. You get the idea. And this whole stronger, more diverse ecosystem, I think, would come back to Games Workshop to help them make more money. So even though technically there would be a portion of the market share that would go out to these third-party creators, the growth in the core game would be significant enough for that not to hurt them. And like I said already, by not doing it, these third-party companies are doing it already. They're just making their own games, which is not growing Warhammer whatsoever. Now, let's talk about the cons of doing such a system. And trust me, there are several. Games Workshop loves control. Most companies do. They want a centralized control over their IP, over the quality, and over the direction that it heads. They are a public company, which means they have shareholders, and the shareholders are their main customer. That's who they have to please first and foremost. They can make the best stuff in the world, but if they don't make enough money quarter to quarter, then they're gonna have problems with their stock prices, and that'll then just trickle down and really hurt their company. So by losing this control, they lose a bit of the narrative, which means perhaps it might actually be damaging to their numbers, maybe in certain quarters, even if overall it's going to help them grow. And of course, there's a chance that I'm totally wrong and that it would grow them more than it would hurt them. Perhaps by opening up that anybody could create miniatures, especially with the advent of 3D printing and the fact that there are a lot of really good 3D artists out there, thanks to the video game industry taking such a big hit and those people now needing jobs, and so they come into this market and they're ready to go. Maybe it would actually hurt their bottom line so that when they came out with new lines of miniatures, there would be so much competition for Warhammer miniatures that they, of course, would probably allow at their own events, because otherwise it's like, hey, you can have an OGL, you're just not allowed to use those miniatures in our events, would seem kind of backwards. And maybe they would lose more money than they would make because of it, and I'm totally wrong in that area. It's a big risk to take, and once you introduce an open gaming license, it is pretty much impossible to get rid of. Just look at Wizards of the Coast. If you need a quick idea of what happened there, a very quick idea, because I do not want to get into it too much, I can make a whole other video about that, and I'm sure you've already watched 100 other ones that have. Essentially, they tried to kind of roll back their open gaming license so that they would have more control over it and that they would be able to profit from what other people made. In other words, they wanted to take more of the money for themselves. You could also follow some of the rumors that maybe some of the people higher up didn't really respect the open gaming license or the community, and they thought that they should just be making all the money and nobody else should. And so once you have an open gaming license, it's a Pandora's box situation where it's the cat's out of the bag, the Pandora's box has been opened and you cannot close it and you cannot go back. So that's a big risk, which is why I don't think they'll ever do it, but it doesn't mean that they shouldn't. And of course, there's the risk of the fact that there's going to be a lot of low quality content. One thing that Games Workshop is known for, whether or not you like their rules, is that they have awesome looking miniatures, tremendously good artwork, awesome looking cinematics. They've got some really fantastic video games that are licensed. They just have such they just bleed quality. Everything about it is just, sweat quality or whatever, you know what I mean? They have so much quality in everything that they do. I'm not saying that they're the best anymore. There are tons of companies who make really good miniatures now, but at their scale, nobody really stands up to them. The amount of stuff they can put out that is good, that is great, that is fantastic, is unmatched by anybody else. So by having third-party content being created, all of a sudden their brand will get associated with a lot of lower quality stuff. Now, I think they could mitigate this by the rules that they have in place for how third-party content is shown. So for example, requiring them to have very prominently displayed a certain logo, which is unofficial, whatever, or open gaming license, not made, or making it very clear to people that this is not made by Games Workshop, but it is part of the open gaming license. So that would probably be mitigated, but it is a concern for a company that prides themselves on high quality. And yes, I know people are laughing already and leaving comments, but come on, it's high quality, whether you like it or not. Subjectively, we can say objectively that it's some really good stuff. But let me dream, okay? What would an open gaming license look like? I envision a creator program. Two things. I want to see a DM's Guild version on Warhammer. So what this would look like is a site that Games Workshop runs So in DM Guild, essentially, you go on there as a creator and you can upload content and you can sell it. And I think they keep like 50% of it because it's the fact that it's a place that you can go and they're hosting it and all this kind of stuff. I don't know exactly the percentage, but I believe it's upwards of 50%, which means that it's actually a possible moneymaker for Games Workshop as well. But you don't have to use DM Guild. It has a slightly different license, in fact, if you do. And you can just go off and do whatever you want. But I would see both a creators program, which would be curated stuff, where Games Workshop is like, we've gone through all the stuff and we are going to curate and invite certain people to create content for this website. So you have a place to go to find high quality stuff that fills a lot of the niches that are currently lacking within Warhammer's own game. I picture a large variety of community licenses that allow people access to the core game and the core setting without risking people being able to just make more Space Marines. Like, for example, it would be really easy, and probably they should, not allow people to make Space Marine chapters. You might think, well, that would be the number one thing. And that's the problem. I think, they already do enough Space Marine chapters. Let people work on other stuff. So they can always prohibit that. They can be like, you cannot expand on existing factions. Maybe all existing factions cannot be expanded upon. Well, that's a hard one, because I would love for Astra Militarum to be able to be expanded upon. I'd love for the Tau to be able to have all sorts of other Xenos races that can be part of their codex. So that's a tough one. I don't know. What do you think? Put it in the comments below. If you even partly agree with me, should they allow you to expand on existing factions, or should it really just be about adding new factions to it? To me, it's got to be a hybrid of a bit of both. That maybe you can't expand on existing chapters, so you can't make more Ultramarine stuff, but you could create your own custom chapters. There you go. I figured it out during the video. What I'd want them to do is say, no, you can't exist on existing official chapters or hive fleets or whatever, but you are allowed to create your own chapters. And maybe they'd have to restrict it if you're making miniatures to just like the shoulder pads and stuff, because they don't want you just copy pasting the 3D files of the miniatures they already have. That would be something they'd have to watch out for. Obviously, you need somewhere on a hybrid system of all this, but really what it would allow is for certain creators to rise to the top, ones that would make fantastic stuff that normally Games Workshop wouldn't bother with, because you're only making maybe $1 million from it, or a couple $1 million from it, or a few $100,000 from it. But that would really enrich the quality of life of people who want to play Warhammer. So what do you think? Would an open gaming license help or hurt Warhammer 40K? Obviously, it's got to be both, but which one is it going to do more? I want to hear your thoughts on it in the comments below. Here's to wishing that we get one, maybe in a certain edition in the future. Who knows? I'm Matthew from Mini Wargaming. Happy Wargaming.